The warehouse in Hell's Kitchen was a cavern of rusted iron and shadows, smelling of salt air and industrial grease. Inside, 10 of the most ruthless street bosses in New York were gathered, their hands on their holsters, their eyes filled with the frantic energy of a cornered animal. They had spent the last 3 hours convinced they were finally going to end the reign of Frank Costello. They had cut his phone lines, bribed his drivers, and intercepted his messages. They were ready for a war. But when the massive steel doors creaked open, they didn't see an army. They didn't see Thompson submachine guns or bulletproof vests. They saw a single man walking toward them with the measured, rhythmic gait of someone taking a stroll in Central Park. Frank Costello stepped into the dim circle of yellow light, his gray suit perfectly pressed, his silver hair shimmering under the bare bulbs. He didn't have a weapon in his hand. Instead, between his thumb and forefinger, he held a single, 6-inch piece of ordinary red silk thread. He didn't say a word, he just stood there, looking at the 10 men who had vowed to kill him, and began to slowly wind the red thread around his finger. The silence that followed was more violent than a gunshot. These were men who had survived gang wars and federal indictments, yet they felt their skin crawl at the sight of that tiny piece of string. "What is this, Frank?" spat out Sal the butcher Moretti, his voice cracking with a tension he couldn't hide. "You come here alone, with a piece of sewing kit, thinking you can stop us? We've got 20 guns aimed at your chest. Give us one reason why we shouldn't turn you into a memory right now." Costello didn't even look at the guns. He finished winding the thread and then held his hand up, the red circle around his finger glowing like a fresh wound in the flickering light. "You see this thread, Sal?" Costello asked, his voice a low, gravelly rasp that felt like it was being whispered directly into their ears. "This isn't just silk. This is the only thing currently holding your lives together. And if I pull it tight, every single one of you dies before you can even find your triggers. If you are watching this and you think Costello has finally lost his mind, then you are falling for the same trap as those 10 men. You are looking at the thread, but you should be looking at the system. This is a masterclass in invisible leverage, the moment when a leader proves that he doesn't need a bullet to win a fight, he only needs to control the consequence of the shot. How could a single piece of red string stop 10 of the most dangerous men in the city? Why did the toughest killers in New York start sweating the moment they saw it? And what is the secret behind Costello's surgical deterrence? You are about to see a psychological execution so brilliant. It will change everything you know about power. Hit that subscribe button right now to join the masters of the long game. Like this video to show that you recognize Costello as the true Prime Minister of the mind. And I want you to go to the comments right now and type "thread" in all caps. Let's see who among you is ready to see the invisible IPLA strings. Now, let's go back to that warehouse, where the red thread was about to become a noose. Sal Moretti laughed, but it was a hollow, desperate sound. "It's a bluff. He's an old man with a piece of string. Kill him." But as Sal reached for his pistol, he noticed something that stopped his heart. He looked at the man to his left, and then the man to his right. He noticed that none of them were moving. They weren't looking at Costello anymore, they were looking at their own chests. Following the line of their gaze, Sal saw it too. A tiny, almost invisible red dot was dancing on his own heart. Then he saw another on the man next to him. And another. 10 men, 10 red dots, all perfectly centered, all perfectly still. Costello hadn't brought an army into the room, but he had brought the city's most elite snipers to the rooftops across the street, and that red thread in his hand. It wasn't a weapon. It was a visual signal. "This thread is connected to a very specific set of instructions, gentlemen," Costello said. His voice as calm as a surgeon's. "My men outside are watching my hand. As long as this thread is wound around my finger, they wait. If I pull it tight, they fire. If I drop it, they fire. If I move it to my left ear, they fire." Costello took a step closer to Sal, the red dot on Sal's chest never wavering. "You thought you were the ones in control because you had the guns in this room. But you forgot that I control the air outside. I've audited your lives, Sal. I know which of you has a gambling debt to the Genovese family. I know which of you is sleeping with the district attorney's sister, and I know which of you has already sold out the others to me this morning." The room tilted. The 10 men, who an hour ago were brothers in a coup, were now looking at each other with suspicion and raw, unadulterated terror. The red thread had done something 100 bullets couldn't. It had destroyed their trust. Costello wasn't just threatening their lives, he was revealing that their alliance was built on sand. He had used a single piece of string to show them that they were all puppets, and he was the only one who knew where the strings led. "The question isn't whether you can kill me, Sal," Costello whispered, his face inches from the butcher's. "The question is, who among you is willing to die first to prove a point that doesn't matter? Because the moment I pull this thread, New York gets 10 new vacancies, and I go home to finish my dinner." One by one, the hands began to move away from the holsters. The bravado evaporated, replaced by the cold realization that they were outmatched not by force, but by a superior intellect. Costello had turned a warehouse into a theater, and he was the only one who knew the ending of the play. He stood in the center of the room, the red thread still wound around his finger, a silent monument to the power of a single, well-placed thought. "You came here to take my head," Costello said, looking at each of them in turn. "But instead, you're going to give me your loyalty. Not because you love me, but because you realize that as long as I hold this thread, you are safe. And the moment I let go, the world ends for you." But then, the most shocking thing happened. Just as the men were about to drop their weapons and beg for a new deal, Costello did something no one expected. He didn't tighten the thread. He didn't use it to negotiate a higher percentage of their earnings. He slowly unwound the thread from his finger, held it up to the light, and then, with a calm, deliberate motion, he dropped it onto the dirty floor. The red silk fluttered in the air for a second before landing in the grime. The 10 men gasped, expecting the roar of sniper fire to follow. They closed their eyes, waiting for the end. But the warehouse remained silent. No shots were fired. No one died. Costello turned his back on them and began walking toward the exit. "The snipers left 10 minutes ago, Sal," he called out over his shoulder, his voice echoing in the vast space. "There are no red dots. There were never any red dots. Those were just laser pointers held by my delivery boys." He stopped at the door, silhouetted against the night sky. "I didn't need snipers to stop you. I only needed you to believe that I had them. You didn't surrender to my men, you surrendered to your own fear. And that, gentlemen, is why I am the Prime Minister, and you are just men standing in the dark." The 10 bosses stood there, frozen in a mixture of rage and awe, looking at the tiny piece of red thread on the floor. They had been defeated by a piece of string and a bluff. Frank Costello had audited their courage and found it bankrupt. But the real shock, the thing that would haunt them forever, was yet to come. Because as they looked closer at the thread on the floor, they realized it wasn't just silk. It was a wick. And as Costello disappeared into the night, a tiny, glowing spark began to travel down the red line, heading straight toward the crates behind them. Frank Costello walked into the cool night air of Hell's Kitchen without looking back once. Behind him, the massive steel doors of the warehouse remained open, exhaling the cold, damp scent of the river. Inside, the 10 street bosses were paralyzed, their eyes locked onto the tiny, glowing spark traveling along the red silk thread. It wasn't just a piece of string anymore, it was a fuse, a burning line between their lives and total annihilation. Sal the butcher Amoretti, the man who had been ready to kill Costello seconds ago, was now breathing like a man underwater. He looked at the crates where the thread disappeared, crates marked with the seal of the New York Port Authority. He knew what was in those crates. He had put them there himself. It was a shipment of military-grade munitions meant for the Genovese coup, and now, it was about to become their funeral pyre. "Cut it! Someone cut the damn thing!" Sal screamed, but no one moved. They were all waiting for the red dots to return, still convinced that 100 snipers were watching their every muscle, but Frank Costello was already 3 blocks away, sitting in the back of his midnight blue Cadillac. He wasn't checking a detonator or looking at a stopwatch. He was calmly reading the early edition of the New York Times. His driver, a silent man known only as the Shadow, looked in the rearview mirror. They didn't pull their triggers. Frank, the driver, noted, his voice a low rumble. Costello didn't look up from his paper. They couldn't, George. You see, men like Sal don't fear death. They fear being the only one to die. I didn't need snipers to stop them. I only needed to make them realize that their secret alliance was a room full of strangers. That red thread was a mirror. It showed them exactly how much they distrusted each other. If you are watching this and you are wondering why Costello would leave a burning fuse in a room he just walked out of, then you are ready to see the double-blind liquidation. Most leaders kill their enemies to solve a problem. Costello? He makes his enemies kill their own future. We are breaking down the psychology of the fuse, the moment when a leader proves that the most powerful weapon in the world isn't an explosion, but the wait for one. Why did none of those men try to run? Why was Vito Genovese waiting in a car 2 blocks away, watching his own soldiers dissolve into panic? And what was the true contents of those crates? You are about to witness the most calculated purge in New York history. Hit that subscribe button right now to join the Brotherhood of the 1%. Like this video to show that you recognize the Prime Minister as the ultimate strategist of our time. And I want you to go to the comments right now and type "Who Domino" in all caps. Let's see who among you understands that when one string breaks, everything falls. Now, let's go back to that warehouse, where the spark was inches away from the crates. Inside the warehouse, the tension finally snapped. Sal Moretti lunged for the red thread, his face a mask of primal terror. He reached it just as the spark touched the wood of the first crate. He grabbed the silk with his bare hands, the heat searing his skin, and ripped it away from the pile. He braced himself for the explosion, for the fire, for the end. But nothing happened. There was no roar of TNT. There was no shockwave. Instead, the crate's lid, loosened by Sal's frantic movements, fell open. Sal stared inside, his heart stopping for the second time that night. The crate didn't contain grenades or C4. It was filled with hundreds of small, white envelopes. Each one was addressed to a different person: the district attorney, the chief of police, the Internal Affairs Bureau, and the wives of every man in that room. "It's not a bomb," whispered one of the younger bosses, his voice trembling as he picked up an envelope with his own name on it. He tore it open. Inside wasn't a threat, it was a detailed ledger of every bribe he had taken, every murder he had authorized, and every lie he had told his family. It was his life, audited and indexed by the man who had just walked out the door. The red thread hadn't been a fuse to an explosion, it was a fuse to their reputations. Frank Costello hadn't planned to blow up the warehouse. He had planned to blow up their world. If they had killed him, the men Costello had stationed outside would have delivered those envelopes to every authority figure in New York. He didn't need snipers, Sal Moretti said, falling to his knees as he realized the magnitude of his defeat. He didn't need to blow us up. He just needed to show us that he's been holding our lives in his hands for years. Every one of us, we aren't his partners. We aren't his rivals. We're his employees, and we didn't even know it. The 10 men, who had come there to start a revolution, now looked like broken children. They realized that the red thread was the truth. They were all connected to Frank Costello. And the only reason they were still breathing was because he allowed the string to stay intact. Outside, in the shadows of an alleyway, Vito Genovese watched through a pair of binoculars. He had been waiting for the warehouse to erupt in flames. He had been waiting to hear the news of Costello's death so he could step in and claim the city. But instead, he saw the doors open again, and his 10 most powerful captains walked out, one by one. They didn't look like victors. They looked like ghosts. They didn't look at Vito as they walked past his car. They didn't even acknowledge his existence. They got into their own cars and disappeared into the night, heading home to open the envelopes that held the rest of their lives. Frank Costello's Cadillac pulled up alongside Vito's car. The window rolled down, and Costello's calm, grey eyes met Vito's furious gaze. "You're looking for a fire, Vito?" Costello asked, his voice steady and cool. "The fire is already burning. It's in the offices of every man who thought they could outplay the Prime Minister. You sent 10 men to kill me, and I sent them home with a reason to never look at you again. You build your empire on fear, Vito. I build mine on the truth. And the truth is, I own every string in this city. Vito Genovese gripped his steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. This isn't over, Frank. A piece of string doesn't make you a king. Costello smiled, a thin, lethal expression that never reached his eyes. A king is someone who doesn't have to tell people he's a king, Vito. I sat in a room with 10 men who wanted me dead, and I walked out with 10 men who will spend the rest of their lives making sure nothing ever happens to me. Because if I fall, their envelopes get opened. If I disappear, their worlds end. I didn't just survive tonight, Vito. I became their only chance at survival. The brilliance of the red thread strategy was its permanence. By replacing a physical threat with a social and legal one, Costello had created a circle of protection that no army could penetrate. He had audited their secrets and turned them into his own personal shield. He didn't have to watch his back anymore, because the very men who wanted to stab it were now the ones guarding it the most. As the Cadillac pulled away, Costello looked out at the New York skyline, the lights of the city flickering like the stars of a kingdom he had just reclaimed. The warehouse was empty now, save for the single piece of red silk thread lying in the dirt. It looked like a discarded toy, a meaningless fragment of fabric. But to the 10 men who had stood in that circle of light, it would always be the most terrifying thing they had ever seen. It was the moment they realized that in the game of power, the loudest sound isn't a gunshot, it's the sound of a secret being whispered in the dark. Frank Costello had audited the underworld and found that the most valuable currency wasn't gold or blood, it was information. And as the Prime Minister of New York, he was the only one with a full bank account. As the morning sun began to rise over the Hudson River, painting the sky in shades of orange and violet, Frank Costello returned to his penthouse. He sat on his balcony, lit a cigar, and watched the city wake up. The coup was over. The traitors were neutralized. And the red thread? He reached into his pocket and pulled out another one, a fresh piece of silk, and began to wind it around his finger. Everything is connected, he whispered to the wind. You just have to know which string to pull. The legend of the thread that stopped a war was just beginning, and for the next 20 years, no one in New York would ever dare to look at a piece of red silk without feeling a cold shiver down their spine.